Okay. All right. Like I said, welcome everyone to a neurodistinct approach for standing out in the job market. My name is Amy Taveras, and I'm the program manager for the Olitsky Family Foundation Career Readiness Program at Carnegie Mellon University. And I will be talking about our presenter today, Daniel, who is an associate recruiter at Integrate. So, just to kind of give everybody an overview, this presentation is being hosted by the Olitsky Family Foundation Career Readiness Program. And the Olitsky Family Foundation Career Readiness Program provides opportunities to build career readiness skills on an individual level, in group settings, and in a professional environments for students who might identify with having cognitive or emotional differences. These are some of the offerings that we have, and I encourage you all to visit our website for more information about the program and what kind of things we offer for students. We also offer things for faculty and staff and employers. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Daniel Rothenberg is an associate recruiter at Integrate Autism Employment Advisors, a national nonprofit whose mission is to help employers identify, recruit, and retain talent on the autism spectrum. Prior to joining Integrate, Daniel worked at Nazareth University in the Career Center as a neurodiversity content writer, helping with their neurodivergent initiatives while earning his master's degree in higher education. He was also a support coach at Rochester Institute of Technology Spectrum Support Center. Daniel also received his BFA in Fine Arts and often exhibits his work in art shows around the country. He currently resides in Rochester, New York. So our agenda for today, Daniel is going to go through 5 things to consider when you're looking for a job or an internship. He's then going to answer some of your questions from the registration form. We kind of looked at all of the people who registered and looked at some of the common themes and came up with questions based off that. And then you're all going to have the opportunity throughout this presentation to ask questions in the Q&A, and we've reserved some time for Daniel to answer those questions as well. And then after we review those questions, Daniel's going to talk a little bit more about Integrate and some of the opportunities at Integrate. And then I will get the opportunity to share some of the Olitsky Family Foundation Career Readiness Program's upcoming events. So, Daniel, go ahead and take it away.
Sounds great. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight. I know it is dinner time and there's a lot going on campus in September, and it probably already feels like November. I was in higher ed for a while. I know the craziness, but I hope that this is informative. And I really do encourage you all to ask questions either in the chat or in the Q&A button, which for those of you who is 5 over from the left on the bottom and has the little chat bubbles. Because I am here to answer your questions at the end of the day. It's your time that we're taking out of your busy day so to learn some stuff. If you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to start with 5 things to consider when entering the job world, and 5 things I've really seen that I find valuable and important. I would also like to mention before I get started, I completely understand that these are a lot easier said than done. Yes, I can sit here and say, well, you should do this and you should do that, and that's great, but it is harder to do in person. So I'm going to try to give some helpful tips. I'll also be having my LinkedIn up at some point, and you can connect if you have further questions. And I hope that today there are some things that you can really consider. So the first one is be yourself, but your professional self. So one of the things I noticed during interviews the most is that people are nervous, which makes sense. Interviews are a big deal. But it means that they're not always their genuine selves, which means that sometimes it's hard for a company to get to know you. Remember, when you're working for a company, you become part of their team. And that means you're working with them a lot. You're going to see them more than some of your family, than your friends. And so you really want to make sure that you know them and they get to know you. But with that said, you can't be your full self. And what do I mean by that? I am wearing a button-down shirt right now. It's blue for those of you who I guess you all probably can see me just have your cameras on. But anyway, I am wearing a blue button-down shirt. I would love to be wearing a big fluffy white t-shirt. Extra large, goes all the way down to my knees. It would be great. But I can't because I'm in a professional environment and that's part of the job. And it's an understanding that if you're going to work, you have to follow the standards that are provided by the company. Next slide, please. So networking is important. Networking is not what it is from the 90s movies where you sit and go to a cocktail party and you have to schmooze for 3 hours and feel really uncomfortable if you don't talk to everybody. First of all, most networking these days is done on a computer, just like you are now. This is a networking opportunity right now. You are meeting lots of other professionals from your field. So, for example, when I used to do these, I would type something like this in the chat. For those of you who can't see it, it says, "Hi, I am Daniel Rothenberg from Rochester, New York, Associate Recruiter, Integrate Advisors." And then I gave my LinkedIn. Giving my LinkedIn gives you, the other person, the chance to connect with me. And if imagine it where you have talks where 30 or 40 people do this, you suddenly have 39 people in your network now that you didn't have 30 minutes ago. That's incredible. Obviously, some stuff has to go in person, and it's hard sometimes when you're shy or nervous. So the key to me is to make a game plan. You don't have to go talk to everybody. Figure out what you're going to say, what the goal of the talk is, and what you want to get out of it. Also, as I say in the nicest way, always have an escape plan. If you get nervous, it's okay to have a route to figure out how to get out of the situation. And lastly, most importantly, I think people, when they consider networking, they think, oh, we have to get to know this person. And that's really not the truth. Most networking and that actually leads to employment are actually people you don't know very well. Because when you become really close, it's kind of awkward to ask for a job. So it's more important to just get to know them on a professional work level. Next slide, please. Decide what's most important to you. So I kind of got lucky and got the best of all worlds that I work at home and I work in a job that I love. But it's important to realize that there are a lot of different factors to getting a job and what you want out of that matters. Do you want the job that's exactly in the field you like? Do you want the perfect location for your job? Do you have to be in the office, or the opposite? You have to be virtual. Being virtual, as someone who's done it now for 4 months, has some real good perks, but also some real negatives to it. And so it's important to remember that you have to pick what's most important to you. For me, the fact that I worked virtually was less important than the fact that I was getting to work in autistic recruiting and that I got to live in my hometown and not have to move. Also, I know that everyone says the best things in life are free. That is just simply not true. Money does need to be a factor. It needs to be important to decide how much you're willing to make because money does have a big impact on our lives. I do believe it shouldn't be the only factor when picking a job, but it does need to be considered, especially if you want to live in an expensive area. I'll give an example. I was offered about $20,000 more to work at UC Berkeley than any other school that I applied for. Well, you might say, why didn't you go to Berkeley? Because to live in California is so much more expensive that it wouldn't have actually been more valuable. So I think those are things people really should consider and research. Next slide, please. Okay, so I could go into a whole workshop on disclosure, and honestly, I'm betting Amy will at some point. But I believe that disclosing with purpose is important. One of the things that I believe in and that Integrate believes in as well, do not disclose in the middle of an interview. It makes the interviewer feel very uncomfortable, not because what you said was wrong, but just because they don't know what to say. If you're going to disclose, I would disclose after you've already received the job offer or even after you've accepted the job offer. But more importantly than that, what do you want out of disclosing? Is disclosing to get accommodations? Is disclosure so that your coworkers will understand you better? There needs to be a reason for disclosing. And my favorite example of that is this. I have a heat issue that I get hot very easily. So when I worked at Nazareth, I asked for a fan, which they gave me. But now I work from home. So if I disclosed and told them this and asked for a fan, they'd be like, well, Daniel, it's your house. You control the temperature. How are we supposed to accommodate this? It wouldn't make a lot of sense. I think disclosing is a very personal decision that you decide, and it might be that you don't pick the same thing from job to job. But just remember that when you're disclosing, be logical and have a reason for it. Next slide, please. And my last thing is something that not enough people do, in my opinion: engage and arrange informational interviews. Now, some of you might be thinking, Daniel, what the heck is an informational interview? So, an informational interview is where you meet with someone, not to interview for a job, but to interview to get to learn more about your field. And it's an incredible networking opportunity. When you have an informational interview, it's a chance to learn more about your field, learn more about the jobs out there. I was in a field where I didn't know half the jobs even existed that were there. And I'm sure for some of the more well-known fields, there are more lists of jobs, but there's always something that you probably have never considered. It also is a great way to network and to get to know someone. And then you never know that maybe later, either they'll have a job for you down the line, or they'll know someone who has a job for you. That is my 5 things. You can go to the next slide.
Before we go to the next topic, I wanted to highlight, somebody asked a great question in the Q&A about what is disclosure.
Okay, so absolutely. So disclosing is disclosing your autism or ADHD or neurodiversity. It's letting a company know that you have this and that it might lead to some differences in your work style. Disclosing does not just have to do with autism. It might be disclosing something else, that you have 2 kids at home and need to be done from work by 3 o'clock every day. Now that's a little bit less of a serious disclosure, just in the way of it's affecting your life differently. So when we talk about disclosure in my world, it's always for disclosing autism, ADHD, dyslexia, etc. But disclosing basically just means letting someone know something about you that's a little bit important or confidential.
And just to add to what Daniel said, you can also disclose if you have like a physical condition or like a chronic illness. It's basically disclosing that you have a condition and that you may need accommodations is usually what the process is. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. It says, I guess we can get to this at the end. Sorry, I'm getting disorganized. Okay, so let's go through the registration questions and answers, and then we will ask the rest of the Q&A at the end. Okay, so this is based off of kind of all of your questions in when you submitted your registration, having to do with standing out, job versus internship search differences, and talking to employers. So Daniel, how can I make my resume stand out?
Okay. So when I look at a resume, the first thing I look for is consistency. And you might say, that doesn't make me stand out. It really does, because that's the way that I will continue to look at your resume. And by consistency, I mean you have the same font, you do it in the same order chronologically when you list your positions, and also that you have good grammar and no typos or spelling errors. And if you ever want help with that, I'm sure there are lots of good career coaches at Carnegie Mellon that can help you. The other thing I look for is the skills that you have learned in your resume. My old boss used to say, you put the skills that you learned in the resume, and then you let them know about the experience in the interview. So what did you actually get out of working a position or volunteering or doing this or that? It's important to realize that I don't have time, and I know that sounds very blunt and rude, but recruiters do not have time to read 18 paragraphs on everyone's resume. It should be short, succinct bullet points. And then in the interview, that's when you expand and say, oh, well, I did this and it was this and I got this out of it. That's when you go into the longer details. The other thing, 1 page. You are all college students. Maybe if you are going for a master's degree, I saw someone was going for a master's degree, it could be 1.5, but it should be cut off at 1 page, usually nothing more than that.
What could make me stand out as a candidate?
So this is a really hard question because every candidate is different, right? And what makes one person stand out might not make another person stand out. But when I'm looking for a candidate, I'm first of all looking for someone who's looking to work and wanting to work a position that they apply for. I'm looking for someone. Sorry, I was just reading the comment. I was look. I'm looking for someone who's a team player. I'm looking for someone who's tried a lot of things, and I'm looking for someone who knows what they're doing in the field. And what do I mean by that? So maybe you're not able to get a job as an app developer, and you want to go into that field, but you can always tinker with stuff at home and try your own projects. Those give you experience and a chance to learn. I'm looking for someone who has wanted to do other things such as work with professors. That's a great way to do stuff as being a research assistant. And I'm seeing someone who's really taken that initiative to apply for the position. And the other thing I really want is I want someone who can sell themselves and say, this is why I am looking for the position. Look, I, more than maybe anyone, do not like bragging about myself. It is weird and incredibly awkward. But that's how interviews work. Interviews are weird and incredibly awkward. So you need to brag about yourself, and maybe brag's a little bit strong, but sell yourself as a candidate. And what also stands out to me is trying lots of different things. Yes, it's great if you are an engineer and you have the engineering background, but a lot of people have that. What makes you different? What makes you distinctive? It might be that you've tried something different. It might be that you've worked at a different place or that you've worked with children or that you have other qualities that are given.
What's the difference in looking for an internship versus a job?
So you guys all remember how my point number 3 was consider what's going on in a job? With an internship, I want you to just throw that out the window. Internships are to learn. And so they don't have to be in your exact field. Now, don't get me wrong. If you're an engineering student, please do not do an internship in dance and theater if you plan on becoming an engineer. Just saying it's for your best interest, but it's a shorter commitment. And so you can consider other things about, do you want to learn? Is this something I might want to be into? Is this the internship that's available given the time? Also, relocation. For example, here at Integrate, we don't usually offer or do as much outreach for internships for jobs based on our location because it's hard to ask someone to relocate for 2 months. It's a much easier to say, I have a full-time job. I can relocate you. But when you're looking for a job, this is something that you should be considering. And I understand this is not 1970. We don't all spend 40 years at the same job. But you should be looking at it as this is something I can do for a good while. And that's not just the contents of the job. So, for example, when I interviewed to Integrate, one of the best things about it were the people that I was going to be working with. Interviewing with them made me really consider this job. And so I think it's important to realize what's your relationship with your boss? What's their communication style? What's the office space like? Is it work for you? Do they offer you the accommodations you want? Those are all things that need to be considered because they're much longer term. Now, as someone who still lives at home in my hometown, I am not saying that you should consider moving if you don't feel comfortable. But if you are going to move, do it for a job. It makes sense if it's a job that's in your field. It's a big risk sometimes, but it can really pay off.
How should I prepare to talk to employers?
Well, I kind of answered this a little bit before, but I would go in with a game plan. What do you actually want to get out of the conversation? Is it just to say, hi, my name's Daniel, and I'm going to be looking for a job next year? Because that could be it. It doesn't have to be this amazing monologue about yourself and everything you've done in the last 20 years. It could just be that you want to talk about your future career. It could be that you want to talk about the field and what they do as a company. I would make a plan about what you want to talk about. And if talking to them in person is scary, which it can be, try figuring out if you can contact them first over LinkedIn or through email before you go to the career fair. I think that's really important. Not all um not all networking and meeting with employers needs to be this high stress situation. I believe you guys all have an event in a few weeks called Employer Connect, and that will be a much more low key networking event. I would go there with the purpose of practicing networking and say, hi. And if it doesn't work perfectly, that's okay. Lastly, before I keep going, always remember the worst thing they can say is, no, I'm not interested. There's nothing else they're going to say.
Thank you for the shout out. The event that Daniel was talking about is the Student Employer Connect event. And one thing I would like to add before we go on to the next question is practicing can be very helpful for this. And if you feel like you're not sure how to talk to employers, what to talk to employers about, the CPDC is available for you to kind of, or your career center, if you're not from CMU, can help you kind of help practice those things. And so you feel more confident. As Daniel said, being confident and being able to brag about yourself is important. So next question. What are good questions to ask employers?
So this was actually almost on my top 5 list of things to consider. One of the things I will always look at in an interview is, does a candidate bring questions to ask the employer? It shows you have research and it shows you've taken some initiative. And please don't ask a question that's right on the website. Like if you ask a question that you can find on the homepage of the website, it doesn't always look the best. So first of all, the questions I would ask, you should ask questions that are personal to you. When I first started interviewing at Integrate, my question to my boss was, what is your communication style? That's not a question that all of you are going to need to ask, but for me, that was very important. If you're not sure about questions or a little bit stumped, ask about what a day's like working there. Ask about their relationship with coworkers. Ask about what's important to the company. Ask about if they've talked to the higher ups, if that's something that happens. But you should find questions that are really important to you. And also remember to have more than one or two because they might answer some of them during the interview. Lastly, always have as the last question, what are the next steps? It makes you look prepared. It makes you looks like you have initiative, and it's a sensible last question.
All right, we have plenty of time for questions from the audience. So first, I would like to announce that this is being recorded and the recording will be sent out. So if you missed anything or want to rewatch any part of this, you'll be able to do that. And Daniel, our first question is, what if you're afraid that you'll be treated differently in a negative way after you disclose?
I mean, that's a really good question. It's happened to me before. And I would love to say that I can guarantee it won't happen. I can't. It might happen. We are working hard at places like Integrate to make it so that places are more neuro inclusive. The one big piece of advice I would give, you do not need to disclose to everybody. Heck, you don't need to disclose to most people. If you want, disclose to your main supervisor. And if you have an office partner, maybe disclose to them just because, if you're like doing things in the office, it might be important for them to understand. But I would love to have a better answer. My answer is there is a risk. That's why a lot of people don't disclose. However, I do think there are a lot of benefits to doing it. And the other answer, I guess, is wait until you're comfortable. Maybe you wait 3 months. I actually, with my old internship, waited 3.5 months before I disclosed because I wasn't sure how my boss was going to react.
The next question, is it a good idea to disclose a disability on a job application based on the 7% disability quota?
So my answer personally is it depends on the application. I don't disclose my individual autism, ADHD, um, or any of that on an application. However, a lot of applications these days say, do you have something? And it includes physical things like cancer and asthma, as well as mental disabilities and neurodiversity. And in those cases, I do feel comfortable disclosing. But again, I would wait unless you need pre-interview accommodations, like getting the questions beforehand. I would wait until after the interview.
What about the self-identify form, during an application process where it says, do you have a disability, and you can opt in and out?
I mean, it's a hard question. That's why I'm kind of smiling because that's a personal choice. If you feel comfortable with it and if it's a company you want to work at, I would definitely consider it. Also, you can always do your research on companies. Do they have diversity initiatives? Are they do they have an employee resource group? So I would look into the company a little bit more, but I would say if you feel comfortable, go for it.
Um, this is a resume question. When you are trying to fit everything in one-page resume, should you prioritize things that have to do more with the field you are applying to, or the things that are different and show you try new things?
Oh, so I might have misexplained myself on the resume question. It's great to have new things. You should absolutely prioritize things that you have done in the field. It is still a job you are applying for in that field, and that is what they are going to be looking for first. So I would definitely prioritize those things.
The next question is about the upcoming student employer connect event, which is something I can answer. I will actually be sharing the registration link towards the end of this presentation, and it is in Handshake. Okay, I have another question for you, Daniel. I was more so wondering if there's an incentive for employers to hire someone who self-identifies as having a disability rather than someone who doesn't, because of how they're supposed to aim for the 7% of their employees have a disability. Yes. Well, not an incentive, but there are companies that are required to have like a certain quota if they're getting funding from certain places. And that's what when you're doing an application, that's what that self-identify form is. And it's that self-identify form is not supposed to go to the hiring manager. That's just supposed to help the company find the quota of how many people that they're hiring are have a disability so that they can measure their diversity initiatives. Do you have anything to add to that?
Not particularly. I think that while I get there is a quota, it's still a very personal choice.
Absolutely. You don't have, yeah. And even if you have a disability and you put no and you want to disclose later, that is okay. Like you can disclose at any point. Okay, another question. If you don't know the answer to a question, what's the best way to continue selling yourself without saying straight up you don't know?
So there's two ways to do this, and it depends on the type of question. The first way, which I would say is the better way, is if you have a similar example or something similar to it. So, for example, when I was asked, have you ever recruited before? No, I hadn't. I didn't know the answer. I have never recruited, but I've done similar things in organizing events. And then you talk about those positive strengths. You can talk about things that are related to the strengths of the question. And if you really don't know, the other thing you could say is, but I'm willing to learn. With that said, I wouldn't use, but I'm willing to learn more than once or twice in an interview.
Another question. How do you showcase your strengths in an interview?
So by showcasing your strengths, what I mean by that is saying the skills that you have learned. So for example, and the things that you have done. So showcase what you have done and showcase the skills that you have. So if you're a good communicator, saying you're a good communicator shows the strengths. Interviews are great. Unfortunately, hiring managers are not always mind readers. And so I think it's important to realize that by telling them the strength you have, it A, shows them that you have them, and it also shows that you're confident in those skills. You're on mute if you're talking.
Yes, I am. How do you handle rejection?
Oh, that's a hard one. Rejection is hard, and feel sorry for anyone who gets rejected from a job. There's a few ways to go about it. Number one, if you feel that you either had a good shot at the job or you just want to learn, you can always email the hiring manager and say, what would I have done differently, or why didn't you hire me? I will tell you that doesn't always respond to an answer, because some hiring managers are either very busy or don't feel comfortable answering that. But it is definitely something that you should ask. You should always say, still, thank you for the opportunity, as burning bridges is just never good. And the other thing that you can do is, I guess you just have to kind of keep up on your horse and get back up and keep going. I know that's a hard answer. I've been in those shoes before, but I think it's important to realize that sometimes maybe you get rejected from a job and it's just not the right fit. It's not you, it's the company either seeing something else, or maybe there's a different candidate that they think will work for different reasons. But I think it's important to realize that when you get to an interview, that means you've done a really good thing and you've worked hard for it. And so it should be an achievement still.
How should you answer the question, what's your weakness?
So I would be partially honest. Like, do not be like, the one thing I wouldn't say is like, my weakness is that I try too hard. I find that answer to be very corny personally. What I would say is my weakness is I am not the best communicator, but it is something I'm working on. By saying that, you're admitting that it's something you need to work on, it's a skill you need to improve. And then you can also say, but this is something that I want to get better at. Something to that extent is what I would go with. I think it's important to admit your weaknesses. Also, the fact that they're asking means that they expect some sort of answer, and they get an answer from everybody. But the answer I would give was, this is something I'm working on. This is something I'm learning more about. This is something I'm willing to keep working on. I said working on like 5 times, but anyway, something to that extent.
What are helpful ways to track your progress when you're networking and looking for jobs?
Oh, that's a great question. The helpful way to there's a number of ways to do it. Number one, if you have LinkedIn and you're messaging people, you can just look at the messaging. Otherwise, I would use some sort of Excel spreadsheet and just mark, this is when I messaged out, this is when they responded, or this is when I applied for a job, this is when they responded, and I would put it in a big Excel spreadsheet.
Do you have any advice for people that have a difficult time doing small talk when they're networking?
I mean, this is not the answer you're going to want to hear, but don't do it. Um, you don't have to ask about the weather. You don't have to ask about the boss's cat. You don't have to ask about their children. Stick to the talking points about the employment and what is being offered. It's something that as a recruiter, you're talking to so many candidates. It's okay if you just want to stick to the job. At least at the beginning, that's what I would recommend. When you get to an office, it's something that you might need to work on if you're working with people every day. But when you're not working, that's what I would answer.
How how do you stand out if you don't have any internship experience?
That's a great question. And It's something that we talk about all the time because getting internships can be harder. I think the key is to, again, maybe try your own self projects, mention things, work with professors, and try other opportunities. I understand that's not the perfect answer, but if you don't have internships, you should be trying to gain other things to put on your resume. You can also just admit, I don't have a lot of internship experience, but this is something that I really know I want to do.
What are some ways to evaluate a company's if they're disability friendly?
So there's a few ways to do that. You can go on their website, look at their mission, look at their diversity statement if they have one. If it's hard too, because if it's like a mom and pop company, if there's 15 employees, they're probably not going to have a diversity statement. It's just it's hard enough to run a small business. But for at least bigger corporations, they will have lots of stuff on their website that you can look at. You can always ask people if they work there. I wouldn't ask right out if they're disability friendly, but I would ask what's the work culture like. And then the other thing I would do is see if they have other opportunities, like working in an employee resource group, and show that they have that emphasis on neurodiversity.
Disability In is also a great resource and a tool that might be helpful to see like what companies are doing disability specific initiatives to support their employees. So that's one resource. Another question, what should we write for the minimum pay requirement?
So what I would do is I would go to Glassdoor or something to that extent, see what the average pay for that job is, and that is what I would write in. It is not the best answer. That was never my strength on job applications. I always had trouble with that, but I think either writing that or writing what you want to be paid. Obviously, if it's an entry level job and they say they're paying between 45,000 and $62,000, don't write that you want $121,000. It's just going to immediately throw away your application. But I think that you should use basically the internet to see what the average in that field is getting paid.
If it's also possible, you can write open. Sometimes it's a lot like applications won't let you, but if that's possible, you can write open so that that will give you more time and you're able to, you know, go through the interview process and do more research on the salary before if you have to give a number. How do you get better at negotiating? I have too much anxiety for that.
We are on the same page. I also have too much anxiety for that. So that's why you have a career coach that can help you write out an email saying what you're asking for. And I'm assuming alumni can come back and use their career coaches at Carnegie Mellon. Is that correct? And
Absolutely.
and so that is where I would start. It is a daunting task, especially for your first job. And I will let you know, based on every person I've talked to, it gets easier after your first job. But what I would do is work with somebody else, write a draft, and show it to somebody else. Remember that you're never in this on your own.
That's a good point, Daniel, that when you first are looking for jobs, it can feel very daunting because you might think that you're just starting out. So, what do you have to offer? But remind yourself what your strengths are and what your experiences are, because those are valuable to an employer. So, just kind of reminding yourself that can be helpful too. What I have another question, sorry. What challenges did you face yourself when job searching and how did you overcome them?
What challenges did I face? A lot of them. So I started when I was young as like a teenager looking for jobs and disclosing. I'm not that old, I swear, but disclosing was not an easy thing. And a lot of people turned me away because I disclosed. So it got to a point where it's like, why disclose? I had trouble with interviews. I wasn't always the most confident talker. I was really bad at selling myself. And what got me through it was two things. Number one, practice. And I know practice can be annoying. but it's really helpful when you keep working at it. It took me probably 10 or 20 interviews before I ever felt comfortable in an interview. And then the other thing was, and I know this is hard to remember sometimes, you're the commodity. They want you. They need you to work so that they have employees. Otherwise, they don't have a business. And so I think it's important to remember that. Now, I'm not saying that you should think you're all that and that you're everything and you're perfect. But remember that if they ask you for an interview, it's because they also have interest in you. And so make it so that you want to learn more about their company. It doesn't have to be a full interview. You should have it so they're also selling you on why you should come work for them. And when I started doing that, I felt a lot more comfortable because it seemed more like a partnership than like a full on interview where one person was in charge.
Does anybody have any more questions? We have one or two. We have time for about one or two.
It looks like there's one more in the
Yeah.
chat.
Are there any efficient ways to learn about and evaluate different teams and departments in a company, especially when such information is not written on the company website?
So I don't mean to keep saying the same thing, but that's what your career coach is for. A lot of your career coaches will have worked with these people over the years. They'll know some of them. And the other thing is the power of networking. LinkedIn, find someone and ask them about it. Set up an informational interview. I did way too many informational interviews, but I would say the majority of people don't do enough. It is a great way to learn about a company, and it's a way to learn about departments. That's how you do it, setting it up. And the truth is, you all are college students, which means that they are going to give you their time because it's helping out the next generation.
Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. Okay. Daniel, last question. What is the most important piece of advice you have for getting a job or an internship?
Keep at it. Understand that getting a job or an internship is basically its own job and it's a lot of work. Networking is the most important thing. It's something that Integrate preaches, but also something that I truly believe in. And it's important to expand that network because even if they're not people you're eventually going to work for, you get to know people who will know people. And I think the other thing is to be as much as yourself as possible. There's a reason I put be your professional self as the first thing. And it's because it's so important. It allows people to see your personality and who you are. And that would be my biggest piece of advice.
Thank you. So if we have some time after the next couple of slides, we'll stay back. So if you have any additional questions, we'd be happy to answer those. So for the next slide, hold on. So this is asking you all to complete a satisfaction survey. I know that you are all flooded with for surveys and things like that, but this is really helpful for us to gauge like how well we're doing, what other things do you want, like what other workshops do you want, because we want to make sure that the workshops that we put on are things that you want to hear and things that you want to know. So it's only 5 questions and it's anonymous, so you don't have to put any identifying information. So please complete that. I just put it in the chat. So I greatly appreciate that. And then Daniel, do you want to talk about Integrate and their upcoming opportunities?
I would love to. So Integrate's a national nonprofit, and our goal is to make it so that companies are more neuro-inclusive. And that way, you getting a job is easier. We have a bunch of openings right now, including 4 internships with the Hearst Publishing in New York, And I'm literally in a hotel room right now because we're working with a technology company in Cleveland for full-time positions. But more importantly, I know you are all busy. And I know that I would love if every one of you checked the Integrate board every day. That's probably not going to happen. But when you submit your resume on Integrate, it makes it so that we will contact you when jobs come available, along with you looking on your website. Lastly, we have a great resource page for resources all over the country that we are working on. Oh, and I heard the associate recruiter is really great.
All right. And then just to update you all on some of the Alitsky Family Foundation Career Readiness programs coming up. So we have the Student Employer Connect event on Thursday, October 5th from 11:30 to 1:30 in the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion. So far, the employers that are participating are PNC Bank, CAI Neurodiverse Solutions, Ford, and Northwestern Mutual. This event is going to have a recharge space. So if you need a space to kind of calm down or relax during the event, either before, during, or after you talk to employers, you will have that space to be able to do that. We'll have fidget objects, we'll have coloring pages, we will have earplugs, and there will also be staff members in there if you want to talk to somebody or need some words of encouragement. We will also be using communication badges where you can indicate based off the badge whenever, like you can change it throughout the event, but you can indicate if you want, if you're open to having people approach you, if you would prefer if only familiar faces would approach you, and or if you don't want anybody to approach you. So those will also be available during that event as well. And so I put that registration in the chat. And then our other event that's coming up will be shortly after the student employer event. And this is about networking. So what do you do after you've done a networking event? How do you follow up with the people that you talk to? So that's what the quick 30-minute virtual workshop is going to be on October 9th from 5:30 to 6. All right. Let's see. Any other questions? I'm going to stop recording.